All righty. Welcome back, everybody, to this week's episode of the Taking a Breath podcast. Thanks so much for joining us. Before we dive into today's conversation, I want to highlight a conversation that's happening outside of the podcast platform, the community, which is for our 16 to 24-year-old listeners. You can visit flow.page/Parker Mays to join the community, which includes Zoom calls and group chats where we are able to engage with other young leaders. So we want you to be a part of that. Joining me today for our conversation is Venus Liles, founder and managing attorney of Liles Law, based here in the Raleigh area, which helps startups, entrepreneurs, and businesses with comprehensive legal services and strategic business coaching. She also acts as senior legal counsel for SAS Institute, drafting inbound technology agreements and implementing processes to maximize efficiency. I got the chance to meet Venus at a virtual event talking about women in entrepreneurship. And because her story and the things that she's doing are really interesting to me, I wanted to bring her on today to share with you all as well. So Venus, welcome to the podcast, and would love for you to share a little bit more of your story with us.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me here today. It's a pleasure to be able to talk to you and all of your listeners. So as far as background, geographically, I've pretty much bounced back and forth between North and South Carolina my whole life. Was raised by a single mother with a grandmother who lived with us and a younger sister. So very kind of female dominated household. Lived with them until I moved out to go to UNC for undergrad. I studied psychology at UNC, and then I went to Duke for graduate school, where I got my law degree, and actually did a dual degree. So I did psychology and law at the same time. And then when I graduated law school, I went the typical route, which is to go to a big law firm, did corporate law there for a couple of years as a firm in downtown Raleigh. And then after a couple of years there, I transitioned in-house, which, as you mentioned, I'm an in-house attorney at SAS, and I negotiate a lot of technology-related agreements there. And for that whole time, my career was very linear. So you get the next right thing. But a few years ago, while I was still at SAS, I started what I called my side hustle, which is Liles Law. So as you mentioned in the intro, I help startups and entrepreneurs that want to start businesses figure out how to do that, kind of navigate the legal aspects of that. And then as a function of really just being around entrepreneurs a lot, in addition to starting that business, I've had a few other entrepreneurial related pursuits. One has been writing a children's book earlier this year about the coronavirus and social distancing and how best to explain that to little kids. And then I also started a pop-up event called Dance Her for women in the Triangle area that pretty much want to go dancing but not stay up late, which may not be your demographic, but your listeners, but it's definitely people my age. And that was set to start in April, but obviously is on hold because of the pandemic. So that's where I am now.
I love it. And I was gonna jump in first to young entrepreneurs, but because you mentioned the book, so the book is called Luna Stays Home, and I want to dive into it a little bit because you mentioned it at the event that I was able to attend, and I thought it was really fascinating. So the idea is around explaining COVID and lockdown and quarantine to young children who are faced, with a difficult time, and especially, parents are faced with a difficult time explaining. So what kind of gave you the idea to write this? And then it was a really quick pivot. Like you mentioned it when we were off camera, that there was this very short window to kind of create and make this happen in a time that, before it's irrelevant. And so would love to hear a little bit of the thought process for that.
Sure. Yeah. So I have two little girls, Violet and Ivy, ages 5 and 3. And like a lot of little kids, they and some adults, they are not a big fan of transitions. So they, whether it's little things like getting from the front door to the car, or really big transitions like, going to a different school or moving houses or something like that. That's always been somewhat difficult for them. And so my husband and I, in order to prepare them for any sort of upcoming transition, we usually, talk to them about it, let them know what to expect. And then if we can, find a children's book to be able to support that. So we, moved houses a year ago. We found a book all about, moving. And when they see somebody else kind of going through something similar and able to process that in advance, it has significantly helped when that event comes. So that's kind of the background. And then earlier this year, a huge transition affected all of us, which was the pandemic, that none of us could really expect or prepare for. And for our family personally, it was like a Friday, they went to school and came home. And on Sunday, we decided that we were going to stay home for that time. At that time, it was about 2 to 3 weeks we thought we were going to stay home. But even that can be super disruptive to a kid that gets up and is used to going to school every day or daycare. And so, we talked to them as best as we could, like we normally do. And then I went to my, typical resources, which would be like, is there a book on this? Obviously, I knew that there wouldn't be a book specifically on this, but I was looking for something that would be similar about kind of having to suddenly social distance or stay home or quarantine. And there wasn't anything, not surprisingly. And so, you mentioned kind of the thought process. There wasn't much thought process at the time. I wish it, I think it was just a function of not having a lot of time, but it was kind of like, this doesn't exist. I wish this existed. Wouldn't it be cool if I made this exist? And then, domino to, okay, let's make this happen. So I wrote the book very quickly. I found an editor, went through a lot of renditions of it to try to polish it up a little bit in the short time frame we had. And it was published April 1st. So, from between the time that we all kind of found out about the pandemic and then it being published was a super quick turnaround.
Yeah.
But as you mentioned, I didn't know we would still be in this situation come November, but I especially knew that no matter what, the sooner the book was out there, the more that it could help families, because as it was back in spring of 2020. And if the point is to help with transitions, you have to really get it out there in order to be able to be in that transition period for kids and their families.
For sure. And I thought that was so interesting. It was the, seeing the problem that is super relevant, not only for your family, but for so many families, and then just creating that solution. And I think that, yeah, for anyone who has written or is doing any of these types of creative things, like the turnaround time is really incredible, but out of necessity. And so I thought that was really interesting. I wanted to shift a little bit to talking about what we were then talking about, which is your experience working with first time or young entrepreneurs. Because as I've gotten to expand and meet more people, these are a lot of the people that I'm interacting with. So I was curious for you, what's the best part of interacting with these first time young entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I would have to say their energy, their enthusiasm. Really, all entrepreneurs, young and old, or whether it's their first business or their fifth business, that particular business is their baby and it's something new. And oftentimes it's something that they've been kind of playing around with in their mind for a while, but when they're ready to take that plunge, that's when they engage me. And so I get to be there right when they're making their dreams happen. And so I can't help but to just kind of smile when I talk to them and they're explaining their product or their idea or their service to me. And that energy is by far the best part. My husband is also an attorney. He's a public defender locally. And, he unfortunately interacts with his clients usually at their kind of lowest point. So that's a time in their life where, they either regret or they made a mistake or whatever the occasion, it's usually their lowest. And I'm really lucky to be able to interact with my clients at what is usually one of the highest points, if not, on the way to the highest, which is hopefully when their product or service or business succeeds. But to be able to be on that ride is really exciting.
100%. Do you think that energy changes over time? Like, do you see people's energy change over time as a result of what's going on with, whether it's okay, sales are starting to go up or those types of things, or, kind of what is that energy? How does it change over time for the people that you work with?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, it definitely goes up when sales go up. I
Yeah.
think when they start to see not even sales, but feedback of one way or another. So whether it's like good client reviews
Yeah.
or client referrals, because one client's telling another client, just that concept of people appreciate what I'm putting out there. And sometimes it takes a while. Sometimes your content can be great or your good or service can be wonderful, but it just takes a while for people to catch on. And so people might have a business for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years before they start seeing, some return on their investment. And so some people, and hopefully most people, are enthusiastic the entire way. And so their energy is positive, but it definitely does take a peak when they start seeing some sort of return.
Right. No, 100%. I think that's so, relatable, whether it's like us as people who are just always looking for that feedback, but it's something special when you see it affecting the people. You hear about referrals, like as people are spreading what you've started to create, like it is a very personal sense of ownership. So I definitely understand that. Interested to get some feedback on kind of the technical and personal skills that you're seeing right now. I know that with technology and with, whether it's engineering and coding and computer science, a lot of these skills are kind of more valued now. And so are also the personal skills, the communication and those types of things. What's the balance that you're seeing in entrepreneurs right now of those, hard skills and soft skills?
Yeah, I mean the hard skills, those technical skills are definitely necessary. So, whether you are a developer or a photographer or a health coach or a lawyer, you have to be an excellent one because there are so many mediocre ones or inexperienced ones. And not to say you can't be successful when you're just starting out, but it's important to just be really good at your craft, whatever that is. So I would say that that's the foundation. And then as far as the balance, that's it. It's almost just not good enough to just be good at that. You have to have those soft skills because you have to be able to connect with your client or your customer or even your boss. You have to be able to show them the value of what you're doing. And kind of similar to the previous question about, once you start getting that feedback, once what you're doing connects with your client, there's like that special switch there. That can happen from day one with your immediate boss or with your first client if you have the soft skills to be able to connect the value that you're providing with the problem that they need solving. And so that can be, communication. It can be just being a really good listener to their needs and be able to adapt accordingly. It can be networking in order to be able to meet, mentors or clients or find job opportunities. It's, the ability to be responsive to other people's, concerns. So all of those sort of soft skills, coupled with if you have the technical background, that's usually a good recipe for success, I'd say.
100%. And that is super interesting because you mentioned like there are so many, kind of like mediocre like in the market, and it's so easy to tell because we can compare so easily, good versus mediocre versus bad. And so really trying to figure out that formula to having the good technical skills, having the good personal skills to add on to that, to really build up. For from your side of things, any tips for people interested in leveling up their personal skills, their communication, their one-on-one connection? What types of things can make someone a better, communicator?
Yeah, I think we tend to gravitate towards things that we are good at. And so if
Mm,
we're uncomfortable with networking, we won't go to networking opportunities. If we don't, if we aren't particularly good at communicating, we'll ask somebody else to write email or to make that. And so in order get better at it, unfortunately, to kind of put yourself outside of that comfort zone, and be able to do the thing that you don't feel comfortable doing, and kind of just tell yourself that, the more that you do it, the better you'll get at it. Even if you're not great at it the first 10 times you go to a networking function, it's just by virtue of continuing to go and putting yourself in that slightly uncomfortable situation that you tend to kind of pick up on, tips and tricks from other people that are either doing it we can look to, or just kind of look at, yourself in those 10 situations and say, what made me feel uncomfortable? How come it was really easy for me to talk to this person instead of that person? So to the extent people can be, more curious rather than timid about learning in general, that's usually a helpful mind frame to have when you're trying to improve on those softer skills.
Yeah, that's so good. And I think that your point leaning into that discomfort, whether it's something that we don't feel like we're good at, or we feel like others perceive that we're not good at, so important. And then that self-awareness to know, like, okay, here's somewhere where I do need to really like keep trying. Like I need to keep doing it. It does take time. I know for me, one of the things that really early this year, I knew that I really like my plan and I like to stick to my plan. And something that you mentioned in the talk is that, 2020 has proven that we really can't plan everything, right? Like we could never plan everything. How has your perspective on pivoting and on flexibility changed over this year?
Yeah, so I am a goal setter, so I thrive off of sort of setting goals, meeting goals, and I've realized that there's definitely a control aspect to that and a predictability to that. And when it's a goal that I can somehow control the outcome of, then it feels good to try my hardest and check it off and get it done. And yeah, 2020 just kind of shook all of that. Uh, and showed that there are just things outside of our control just naturally, and that you might try to plan and goal set as much as possible, and I'm sure people had great plans for this year, and the failure or lack of that happening is not a direct reflection on us. It's just a matter of what took place this year that nobody could expect. So pivoting has always been important for businesses, and for people, and but especially this year, and I've been able to kind of look at businesses that have thrived despite the pandemic, and it really seems to be the ones that have pivoted, the ones that didn't kind of hold on to, well, that wasn't our plan for this year, and instead kind of looked at, okay, this isn't what we expected, but how can we change, how can we meet our clients' needs, how can we move forward? And then on just a personal level, it's really taught me to just have a little grace with myself and just realize that, if it's because of a pandemic, that's a clear outside of my control phenomenon. But even if it was slightly in my control, maybe in 2021, I just don't meet the milestone that I set for myself. There are other factors at play. There are other, uh, things out of mold that may not be a negative reflection on me. So I hope that we can all kind of carry that with us forward, even post pandemic, that it's okay if we don't, check off all the boxes, that life happens. And we just kind of, the more we can go with the flow, the better.
That's so good. I love that. And that's something that I am still like, I'm gonna need to keep listening to those words, because it's hard, but it's so necessary right now. And especially like moving forward, are there any things or any insights that you can give in terms of what are things we should be looking at in terms of pivoting in the future, as we maybe, whether it's coming out of the pandemic or whether it's just moving forward, especially for young people, what are some things we should be, thinking about coming out of it?
I don't have any terribly insightful, meaningful things to say about that, unfortunately. But I do think, that it's helpful to think of our future in a nonlinear way. So it's
Yeah.
not just, this is the path that I'm on. It's the only path that's right for me. And if I veer away from that, then I'm, a failure, or not reaching my goals, or I'm not going to be the person that I want to be. And I've started, recently listening to podcasts and reading books about kind of decision making, and how it's helpful to an analogy that I've kind of been toying around with and that I've heard a few places is kind of like the trunk of a tree. And so you're going up a trunk of a tree, and then there's all these branches, there are all these opportunities available to you.
Mm.
And, maybe, your education takes you down one branch, and the more that you study, the sturdier that branch will be, and you can keep going farther and farther. But it's okay to kind of pivot, go down if the branch forks, or just jump to another branch, or go back down the trunk and up a different route. Like, there's a lot of different possibilities for our future. And to the extent we can keep that in mind, even post pandemic, and just kind of realize that it doesn't have to be one plan, one set framework, the easier we'll be able to adapt when inevitably things are not going to go our way.
That's really good. Yeah, I do think there that point about possibility is just so important, because we realize that we get so locked into, even especially for students, it's like you get locked into, okay, I'm a animal science major and this is where I'm going forever. Like, that's the direction. But realizing that, okay, there is so many changes that are going to happen over the course of your life. You aren't, as a 17, 18, 19-year-old, locked into forever. I feel like there's so much pressure on that. And I'm interested, especially for young people, for late high school, early college, through college students. What are some ways that you'd recommend investing our time, money, energy, just those types of things that could, pay off long term, especially for people interested in maybe entrepreneurship, or just a kind of that personal growth, high achieving route?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the first step would to realize how valuable the resources of time, energy, and money are, and being intentional with how you spend those resources. Because especially when you're younger, you can get pulled in a lot of different directions, wanting to say yes to everything, or not wanting to burn bridges or close particular doors. But it is your time, and it is your money, and it is your energy, and you have authority over what you want to do with that. As far as people interested in entrepreneurship, there are so many resources, from podcasts to books. Nothing kind of replaces being a part of a group. So if you can find, whether it's a virtual group, or when we start gathering in person again, startup or entrepreneurship networks, or even just topics that you're interested in, just to be around other people that have similar interests as you, I think is really helpful and can be really clarifying. And then, kind of on that interest note, I don't ever see anybody who regrets just investing time in the things that light them up. So the things that are really fascinating to them, even if it doesn't align with their career or their education. Like, if you're into photography or anime, or health and fitness, or whatever you're really into, and that you would read or learn about in your free time, if you can lean into that a little bit more, usually there are opportunities to make that your career, if you want to, or just a really cool hobby, or a side hustle. So it seems, and I've had to learn this kind of later in life, that the more that you can be your true self, and embrace those interests and kind of cultivate them, rather than following in line with what you think that you should be doing, that's an intentional and fun way to spend your time.
My goodness. And I love that, because I think that, especially for the people that I am around that are kind of high achieving, or are working towards that, I see people being pulled in so many directions. And I tell people this a lot, is like, everyone wants to tell you how to spend your time, right? Like, I'm like, yo, I want you, even this example, I was like, hey, can you come on the podcast? And I'm sure there's 100, right, people who could be using this 30 minutes that we're chatting. And it's that type of thing where it's, okay, what is really going to get me, whether it's I'm really interested in this thing, or I really want to help out this person, or want to talk about it. It's like, you have to own that decision, right? And I think that there is sometimes this lack of ownership, that people want to say, well, I just want someone to tell me what to do, or I want someone to kind of make my schedule for me, and those types of things. And long term, that's where you run into exactly what you're talking about, where it's like, Well, I just hated my whole day because 8 people were telling me what I had to do with my day, right?
Right. Yeah, it's really interesting though, like the being pulled in different directions and the concept of like I have to
Yeah.
go to this meeting, I have to go to soccer practice, I have to take a shower. It's like you actually don't have to do any of those things. You can decide not to do any of them, and that's your choice, and there will be consequences, but maybe it's worth it to you to not go to those meetings anymore and to quit playing soccer and to just not take a shower for a week because you have something else you want to do. Like that, those are your decisions. And I think language is really important. And I've noticed it more with like the kids, my little girls listening to my husband and I talk all the time. You know, if we keep saying the words I have to about going to work or about having to, get our oil changed or whatever it is that we, typically just chalk up to like daily life stuff, it really shows them that we're more like puppets just doing things that we have to do and not that we've actually made choices. So we are choosing to get our oil changed so that our car will drive better, and we're choosing to go to work because we want to continue in this career, and so we've actively tried not to use those words and that phrasing. um, Sorry. So can you see me? Okay. And that has been challenging because I feel like our whole lives we just use that to kind of get out of the ownership of it, like you said.
Yeah, and choices are all about priorities, right? Like
Mm.
if we don't have clear priorities, then naturally it's easier for us to say, okay, someone else is making these decisions for me. You gave the example of taking a shower. Like, yes, of course taking a shower is important to me. Why is it important? Because I'm prioritizing my health and the health of the people
Right.
around me, right?
Yeah.
It's like so we subconsciously make these choices. Okay, I want to make my bed so my room looks organized, or I want to take a shower so I'm ready for the day, or I want to exercise so that long term my body is healthy, or there's all these things, and subconsciously we're making these priorities when we're watching 4 hours of Netflix on a Thursday night, or but we're just not intentional about it. And I think that's especially for young people, which is why I love to emphasize this, is because for young people it's easy to get sucked into the smartphone. I'm guilty of this, of spending hours on social media or all these different things. And if I'm not intentional about, okay, here's the way that I want to spend my day, here's the people that I'm prioritizing, here's the organizations or the businesses or the projects that I'm spending my time on, then yeah, my day's going to get sucked away and I'm going to have spent 12 hours on nothing. And then I'm going to feel bad. So yeah, I think it's all about owning our choices, which is from our priorities. And if we can do those things, then right, we're going to be centered on a path towards where we want to go.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love it. I got really passionate there for a second. Right at the end, I was loving where that was going, and that's especially because it's something that I see so much with high school. And I wanted to make sure to drive that home. But Venus, I wanted to end with just if you wanted to share, one last thing about anything from your career or anything, especially for our younger audiences who are listening, maybe some encouragement for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of touched on this earlier with with the tree analogy, but just the fact that there are a lot of possibilities open to
Yeah.
you, and you don't necessarily need to even know them or plan for them, but just be ready to accept them when they are presented to you. So it might be a problem that you notice one day that you want to solve. It might be a job opportunity that you weren't necessarily expecting, but excites you when you hear about it. Just to kind of not have, and I know as a type A person, it's easy to have this, but like this rigid framework of how you want things to go, and to just loosen that up a little bit and be okay with what life presents you, because there are just amazing opportunities in the next, month, 6 months, year that you don't even know are waiting for you. And as long as you're ready to accept them and the timing's right, great things will happen.
Absolutely love it. Venus, I really appreciate your time. And you mentioned it earlier, getting plugged into a group around something that you're interested in. Wanted to throw that shout out back. I did not tell her to say that. I didn't even share that we had that. But for our 16 to 24-year-old listeners, hop in, go to flow.page/Parker Mays and join the community. That's going to be Zooms with guests like Venus, group chats where we can connect and talk more. So we are going to have all of those things set up for you if you're interested. And especially right now, if you don't have anywhere to go, spend some time investing in yourself. We'll also, if you're following us at Taking a Breath podcast on Instagram, we're going to be cutting up some clips from this, and we will tag Venus's website and all of the places that you can find more about her work. So make sure to check us out there. Facebook, LinkedIn, all the content will be there. So looking forward to continuing to put out amazing content with amazing guests like Venus. Venus, thanks so much for being on today.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. All right. We'll see you guys next week.
See ya.